Hi, this is Glen Mowrer, and we're here today with Steve Isakson on the next step. And Steve Isakson is a candidate for the United States Congress in the 24th Congressional District in California.
Correct.
And Steve is an independent, a man who has no association with Democrat, Republican, Green Party, other party, but he's made the decision to run in the coming primary, which will be in a couple weeks, and to put his own fortune, to the degree that he wants to invest it, and time and energy into a race that many would say is sort of tilting at windmills. So I've asked Steve to come on the show and talk to us a bit about why he's doing this, and why he's not associated, or why he chose not to be associated by political party, and other things that I think will be of interest as part of our little series on American politics and the various aspects of the political process in the United States. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself first. You're from up in the northern part of the district.
Atascadero.
And you're by training an engineer?
Training engineer / scientist, whichever, but mostly I work as an engineer at this point.
And you're a consultant as well, an engineering consultant?
That's correct.
Okay.
Electronics.
Okay. And you were educated locally, UCSB and Cal Poly?
That's correct.
So,
PhD from UCSB, and Cal Poly is in physics and computer science.
Okay. So you're running as a declined estate or independent candidate. You're the only one of, I think there's 8, are there 8 candidates in this election?
Total of 9.
9 candidates in this election, and you're the only one that doesn't choose a party affiliation.
I haven't chosen a party affiliation since the mid-'70s.
Can tell us a little bit about that. Well, how did the decision come that you decided that you could not be comfortable with any political party identity?
Because I found I didn't support the platforms of either of the major ones, parties, and to some extent not the third parties either. Mm-hmm. And I decided to some extent, I'm my own party.
Party of one? Well, I hope they'll get more votes than one. But
I'm guaranteed 2. My wife says she'll vote for me.
But it's a secret ballot.
True.
Because you'll know if he doesn't. So 2 years ago, Lois Capps ran in this election again, as she has before, your opponent.
Yes.
Again, in the final competition was Abel Maldonado. She beat him 55 to 45. She had won the primary before that pretty handily. She's certainly a popular politician in the district. What is it? What issues do you think that you would like to bring to the public attention that would differentiate you from Lois Capps' record or Lois Capps' views?
To a large extent, Lois Capps is very popular. I expect her to do okay in the primary. She'll be one of the candidates in November, I fully expect. She's, in many ways, a very good politician. I like her in many ways. But my biggest concern is she tends to represent the Democratic Party more than she does all of the people in this district.
I think that's an interesting point that should be looked at a little closer. Many politicians today are accused of this loyalty to their party above loyalty to the constituents that voted for them.
Yes, and the results of that is what I've been observing more and more in recent years. It's probably always been there to some extent, but it seems to be getting worse, is general dysfunction in Congress. The two sides, since it's made up mostly of the two parties, the two sides simply don't seem to be talking to one another.
No, they
anymore.
don't. They talk to their in cliques, in groups.
Yeah, there's backdoor talking and what have you, and there's some small groups that still talk. But it was much more plentiful a few decades ago, where they would, at least at minimum, after hours, go join one another at the local bar or whatever.
Well, but they were Democrats and Republicans then too.
Yes,
But
at least they were willing to talk and work together.
Matt Boutte, I think it was the 2 years ago, a independent ran in the same primary race that you're running in now. A previous independent ran. He got about 2.5% of the vote. Didn't make it to the top two with 2.5%. And I think you're candid enough to recognize that you're probably not going to make it to the top two either. But let's
I
talk.
want to keep a positive philosophy, though.
Well,
but yes, I went in knowing my odds were long.
Odds were long. That's a good way to put it. Let's talk about the idea of a top two primary. Now, you're an independent, so it probably wouldn't matter. But there are people who identify with political party. It used to be that if you ran in your own party primary, won that primary, you got to run in the fall election as a representative of that party. So you have a Democrat, a Republican, a Green, a Libertarian, an American Independent, or whatever party that had a nominating process. So we had candidates in the election. An independent would not have been in that because you would have run in the same category you are now in the primary. And if you had,
actually, at that point, you would have run only in the general.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely correct. I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed. I had that backwards in my mind. I had it right in my mind, but backwards in my mouth. So you don't get that exposure now. Your exposure is here
only in the primary. Or hopefully, I'll get the general as well. Got to be positive.
What do you think about this idea that voices like yours won't be heard when more people are paying attention? I think we have to agree that more people pay attention to the finals than they do the primary.
That's true, but even before 2010, or even 2010, the more people listened during the general, but the top two parties tended to filter out all the third-party people anyway. The debates very largely were between the Democrats and the Republicans.
But now you'll have the debates between Democrat and Democrat, or Republican and Republican in many districts.
I have to agree with that. There have been a number of debates in this district up till now in this primary, and they've been all Republican.
Because the Democrats aren't talking. They don't need to. Spend their money.
Congresswoman Capps doesn't see the need to debate.
She's raised, by the last total I saw on the website, $1.3 million.
Sounds about right.
Her closest opponent, actually two Republicans, have raised about $1.25 million apiece. So she's running at 10 to 20. They're running at 10 to 20%, cumulatively 20% of her total. And what is your campaign?
A very small amount. I'm doing this on a shoestring budget.
I should mention that there is a website available, Matt, and we hope to have it on the screen on occasion. But it's Steve Isakson for Congress.com.
Yes.
And obvious, great title. On that page, there are some of the campaign issues that you've identified as you thought were worthy of explanation and expansion on the website. Let's talk about a few of those.
Okay. It's still a work in progress, but I'm willing to talk on them.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned in there that I thought was of interest that people here in Santa Barbara, the southern part of the district, don't pay as much attention to, was your discussion of Diablo Canyon, which is certainly a big issue up north, the nuclear generating facility.
It's always been a big issue up north.
Right. So tell us what the issue is, I guess, just to surmise, is that it's a nuclear generating facility right on the edge of the ocean, Fukushima and all, but it produces a substantial portion of the energy that electrical energy used in California. And the question is, should we take it offline, just wear it out, or what? So tell us about your thoughts on this.
It was the original design parameters was to be around for 20 years. It's already been around 30 years, and it's up for licensing again in another 10 years. So there are those, though it's on hold right now, that want to renew it for a third 20-year period, making a total of 60 years on an original 20-year design. Now, I have some confidence that there will be enough oversight that where you're getting nuclear embrittlement and that sort of thing, there will be some repairs made in order to get it go forward. But nuclear power is also extremely expensive.
It is.
It does one thing very well, though. One or two things. One, it doesn't generate much in the way of greenhouse gases. And the other one that it does is provide a nice base load for the entire network. It's something wind and solar power doesn't do well at, is providing that base load. As it turns out, cost of installing a solar array commercially now has gotten cheaper than putting in a nuclear plant at this point. So there are several research projects going right now to provide energy storage, so that absorb energy during the day, put it back out at night to keep the base load up. Right. And if that can be put in place, and PG&E worked on some of pumping water into reservoirs and bring it back out again.
Gravity generation, yes.
But if that can be implemented, and as I say, there are several people running around doing that, solar power could become cheaper than keeping the nuclear power plant alive.
Many people say, certain of my Green Party friends say that if we had the same subsidies for solar and other natural energy that we've got for nuclear and some of the hydrocarbon-based programs, it would be cheaper right now. So it sounds like you're sympathetic to the idea of at least phasing out at Diablo at the earliest opportunity, and I think that
was the thing, at the earliest opportunity.
Right.
You can't just turn it off without a backup. Otherwise, you can work during the day and turn the lights off at night.
So an issue like this that I think is, well, you're an engineer, so this is something that sounds like an engineer's thought it through. A reasoned attitude about risk and cost and potential. If you express an opinion like this in a debate or in a forum where somebody like Lois Capps is there, or the Republican candidate, or any of them, do they engage you in this kind of conversation?
Some engagement. Generally, I please nobody, because it tends to be very polarized. Either let's keep it going and provide the energy, or we need to shut it off.
Yeah.
But it has to be looked at in a balanced manner. It really has produced something we need.
It is. I mean,
but
the French and Japanese economies were sustained by nuclear energy for decades.
My other concern is only that if something were to happen, as unlikely as it is, the power companies aren't really liable for all the damage.
Yeah, they have a maximum liability issue. They get
Price-Anderson, I think?
That's part of the subsidy that I'm talking about, is that the federal legislation limits the maximum liability for nuclear generating companies at a dinky amount of the total damage it would cost.
And then the American government at about 10 times that.
That's
and
right.
Then nobody's liable.
That's right. So it's like too big to fail, too big to pay. So that's good. What about the? You had a discussion of something called Convention of States, and I'd be curious about what's the reference there?
Well, I was attending a political rally, and in all honesty, I didn't even know that anybody was contemplating Convention of States.
Yes.
I guess I just wasn't well enough informed. The major reason is to promote a balanced budget amendment. But basically, Convention of States is something that's called out in the Constitution, that the states can, if they don't see that the Congress and the President are moving forward to do something needy, I think it's 2/3 of the states, if they call for a Convention of States, can call a convention to rewrite a portion of the Constitution with amendments.
I'm aware of the this idea. I know that the people who oppose it are frightened by it because, as I understand it, once that convention is underway, there are no limits about what it can consider.
And that's what I heard. And so I kept reading and reading. And as it turns out, nobody knows.
Right.
Because nobody's ever done it before.
That's right.
Quite a few of the states have put forward, going forward, to call the convention together. And I'm somewhat for a balanced budget. It just has to be done carefully. You can't destroy the economy in the process.
The definition of a balanced budget is probably something we could get into, but I mean
that's a very nebulous subject.
Right, it's a very difficult subject because most people, in terms of personal finances, don't ever live in a real balanced budget. I mean, most of us have obligations that exceed our income, but we pay for them by borrowing and other things. So that would be a balanced budget by most standards. I consider that my family has a balanced budget, but I know that my potential liability may well be more than my income would pay for that year. But I'm willing to do it. But let's not get that. So what else are subjects? You have an interesting discussion in there about the Second Amendment, which would sort of nuance. I thought it was interesting. One of the issues you mentioned, and I've always found this intriguing, is the Constitution talks about the right to bear arms. And you focused on that idea, wear arms.
Would you support my right to bear thermonuclear arms?
I've used that question. I've brought that similar question up. I mean, should we have a tank? Should we have a
How about a little Tommy down the street having a drone with air-to-surface missiles?
Air-to-surface missiles. So,
how would you feel about that?
Yeah, and I've pointed out that it's not about guns, and I was intrigued because you saw this as well, I think, and so the question is, pretty clearly we need some regulation.
That argument that I went through on my website was basically to make the point, there are limits. And I think we all agree there are limits to our right to bear arms.
We don't want a flamethrower next door.
Yeah. The question then becomes, what are the limits? It's not unlimited.
And the Supreme Court now has said that seems to be saying that the limit is self-defense. You have a right to bear arms for purposes of self-defense, which I don't believe the Constitution ever contemplated as being part of the Second Amendment, but nevertheless, that's the current state of the law. So how much weaponry do you need for self-defense, I guess, would be your reasonable question.
If that's how it's currently judged by the Supreme Court, that would be the logical question. And I think that answer is actually different in the countryside, perhaps, than it is in, say, in downtown New York City.
I agree with that.
And so, while I think the federal government could put broad brushes on limits at the top and bottom end, in the end, I think it has to not just go to state decision as to what it is. It actually has to become a local decision.
I think there's truth to that. And again, I've personally just had this conversation. What is reasonable out in the country where they're used to hunting small animals and actually eating the food that they gather.
As long as they're doing it for feed.
Yeah, is a reasonable thing, whereas having that same weaponry in the backyard in a home in downtown Chicago is probably not a good idea.
Or a condominium.
A condominium even, yeah. Okay. So what else do you think that the candidates who are either running for this or in office aren't attending to or should or attend to that they shouldn't attend to? What other issue would you think is a big one for your candidacy?
Well, the one that drew me in the most was the general dysfunction. And in general, none of the candidates are trying to get around that. They're just saying, this is what I'm going to do, and we need to take control, or we have control. I support this party or, well, there's only
So they-
Democrats and
they vote in
Republicans
they vote
against
in
me.
blocks, and
Yeah.
they vote in blocks against one another.
That's correct.
And you think that should be,
They need to talk to one another and work together more.
do you think as an independent that would be more likely to be done, more easily done because you don't have this allegiance to?
Since I wouldn't be viewed as the other party, at least I would be able to talk to the other side without getting in trouble with any party leadership and try to reach compromise between them.
Congress now has a couple independents. Bernie Sanders in the Senate describes himself as an independent. He lines and votes with the Democrats most of the time. And there's another senator from Maine, I think. I'm not sure
think it is Maine, yeah.
if there's anybody in
No one in the House.
in the House who's identified as an independent any longer.
No one in the House currently.
So that would be. And have you done any research about the last time unaffiliated members of the House?
They seem to tend to align themselves with one party or the other in general.
Yeah. Well, that's because of money, I think, going back to this idea that you can't get elected. I mean, Jesse Unruh, a famous California politician, said that money was the mother's milk of politics. I remember this because Jesse was a grad of my school, USC, and he was remembered there fondly for stuffing ballots and other chicanery in student elections. But he pointed out that you need money for people to pay attention to you. And so, 1.25 million for Capps, 125,000 each for a couple of Republican opponents, and almost nothing for you. Doesn't it feel a little frustrating that you can't get heard?
Not totally. Up till now, I'm being heard not quite as much as the other candidates, but largely the press, I get press interviews. I'm doing something of this nature. Now that we're getting close, the TV commercials are showing up, and that I can't afford to push forward. It's a little bit frustrating in that sense, but mostly what I've been after is to get some of my ideas out through my website and a little bit of name recognition. If I can get through the primary, which, whether it's realistic or not, can open it up. But there's an actual path forward, since to some extent the Republicans are shooting themselves in the foot by having so many candidates. But after that point, I suspect, even though I'm an independent and not honor bound to anybody or obligated to anybody for money, I think quite a bit of money would come in at that point, because it is just two people. And there does seem to be, since this district is so relatively evenly split, not totally, but somewhat evenly split, with a lot of independents in it.
Yeah, I got the numbers on that. The Democrats at the last registration count were 38% of the registered voters, Republicans 34%. These are within a few percentages, points of 1%.
Yeah.
6% of other registered parties, Greens, American Independent, Peace and Freedom, and 22% who declined to state. And the decline to state is increasing in this district as
rapidly.
it is in many other parts of the country. And this is part, I think, of the public reaction to the kind of polarization and dysfunction of the Democrat-Republican Party system that you've described.
And I suspect, if I get have gotten my name out, which we'll see in a few weeks how well I did that, a number of those independents could very well vote for me. But we'll have to see on that. I don't know. I know I have received a number of emails from people interested in that particular fact. But be that as it may, I think at least what I want to achieve most is to get some of my concepts of some of the issues and on the subject of the budget as well out there, and make people think about what their elected officials are actually doing out there. If I achieve that, even if I don't get elected, I think I've achieved something.
Well, going back to the opening theme of the show then for a moment before we finish. This whole idea that in American politics we've come to, most people in America, I think, have come to think of the two-party system as almost constitutional. there's a tendency, if you were to go into schools and ask them if the Democratic and Republican Party are named in the Constitution, they might well say yes. And yet we know historically that in the course of this nation's history, some parties have risen and fallen, and others have come and gone. Everything from Whigs to the American Socialist Party. Others have come and gone, or the
very popular Prohibition Party.
Very popular Prohibition Party. Single-issue parties often, sometimes, but still, there's always been people who see themselves as non-affiliated and above the fray. Would you recommend this to? I'm sorry. Let me finish that thought again. In local elections, in municipal elections, in county elections, in California at least, they are ostensibly nonpartisan, although
Correct.
most people know what affiliation a given candidate might have,
Becomes
but they
pretty
don't
obvious.
run as a Democrat, Republican, or Whig. They run as a candidate for city council, candidate for mayor. Would you encourage, number one, others to do what you've done?
Yes.
And would you encourage that the state consider, de-emphasizing political party titles?
Political parties basically provide a platform that they say, this is what we're for. And in my opinion, when somebody runs under a party title, they're saying, this is what I believe. And I don't think most people actually believe that, but they just do that. I would strongly suggest that more and more people run as independents or even third parties, if they agree with the third party, to put out ideas. Because even if those third parties or independents don't get elected, the political parties themselves do listen, and it causes the political parties to change with time.
But I might say that, just to slightly reverse that, unfortunately, I think maybe one of the values of a party was that you did have this idea of a platform, and you did have this pretense that a candidate who is running as a Democrat actually believed in the platform. But over the last 30 years or so, I've seen the party platform process become meaningless. And we even have situations, as we did in the last presidential election, where one candidate disavowed the platform for the party that he was running on, and said, no, I don't care what the convention chose as a platform, this is what I believe. So maybe that's part of the disintegration of the idea of parties.
In part. Even in this election, we have 9 candidates. At least at the time he filed to run in the district, one of the candidates wasn't even registered in this district. Another one was registered one party right up until the time he decided to run, at which time he registered for the other party.
Well, then we're getting to the end now, so we have a few seconds. I want to say thank you to the staff, Ali Adichak, Juanita Chatham, and Tess Burke, and enjoyed this interview. It was very pleasant, and I wish you very good luck and success in your campaign.
I thank you very much.